To perform crispy, clean walking lunges, you're gonna take a step forward that allows you to allow the knee to track a little bit over the toes and keep your full front foot planted. If you're coming up onto your toes and your heel is lifting, then bring out your foot slightly from your back leg. Now, once you have stepped and you've grounded that foot, you're gonna think about maintaining a slight forward lean. So we're gonna think about keeping that weight into that front leg. Far too often, people will disassociate their rib cage and their pelvis, so they'll go into that upright position, and then they end up putting too much weight into the back leg, which is not the goal of the walking lunge, and losing out on some of the adaptations we're trying to drive to that lead leg. So when you step, you're gonna adapt a slightly forward leaning position to where the head, rib cage, and pelvis are all in alignment, or at least somewhat of a neutral-esque alignment with one another. If there's any disassociation, then we can lose out on some of our abilities to bias what we are trying to drive with the walking lunge. So now once you have stepped and you're in your position, you're gonna think about driving that lead leg foot into the ground and driving down and standing up by extending the knee and keeping weight in your quad and thinking about extending at the hip. A lot of adaptations can be driven with the walking lunge by biasing how we're actually initiating the movement. So for the general walking lunge, you're gonna think about stepping down into the ground, pushing off with that front leg, keeping your weight slightly forward with your intention of loading that lead leg, and then you're gonna progressively step into your next rep. So once you've nailed walking lunge form and you understand the basics of it, and you wanna get a little bit more advanced with your movement patterns, you can bias your knee and hip joints slightly to facilitate more bias towards the quad and the glute. Now, if you're trying to bias the quad with the walking lunge, one thing you're gonna focus on doing is allowing your knee to track a little bit more by also bringing in that lead leg. So you're gonna allow your knee to track over the toe a tad bit more, and then you're gonna think about keeping a bit more weight over that lead leg. So you can adapt a slightly more forward leaning torso position. And now as you stand with that walking lunge, you're gonna think about forcefully driving into the ground with that front foot. And if it helps, when you have that fully planted position, think about almost initiating the driving portion of the extension of the knee on that lead leg by driving the balls of the feet into the ground. You're not gonna wanna necessarily come up onto the toe, but initiate that slight extension of the knee by driving into the balls of the feet on that lead leg. Now, if you want to bias the glute with the walking lunge, what you're gonna do is you're gonna take a slightly longer stance. So as opposed to the quad bias where we're having the knee track over the toe a bit more, we're gonna take a slightly longer stance in the glute biased walking lunge, and we're gonna focus on maintaining a slightly more vertical knee position, adapting a slight forward leaning torso position, and then as we initiate that lead leg concentric movement pattern, so as you begin to stand, I want you to think about displacing a little bit more weight into your lateral posterior part of the heel of that lead leg. And I want you to think about almost pulling your butt cheeks together and extending forcefully at the hip when you stand up before stepping into your next rep. Now do note when I say bias your weight into that posterior lateral part of the heel, I don't want you to bring the toes up by any means. Just think about slightly biasing your intent and attention to that portion of the foot when you are driving into the leg and standing up. And really think about, once again, bringing your butt cheeks together almost as if they're like in a circular movement pattern, like you're trying to close your butt cheeks in together, and then extend at the top with a bit more of a force of extension at the hip. That's gonna bias your glutes a little bit more and be able to target your glutes a bit better with the walking lunge. So if you're a beginner trying to learn and conquer the walking lunge, first off, welcome, you're gonna crush this. But I would love for you to focus on some foundational movement patterns that are gonna carry over when it comes to your long-term growth when loading this exercise and learning how to bias your movement patterns to facilitate different adaptations. So the first tip I'll offer you is, if you're confused on where your lead leg should be in regard to your foot positioning, place your back leg against the wall so you can have your foot flat, or you can even have it off a little bit and have toe contact, and then bring your front foot out in front of that back leg once you've grounded that leg into the ground. Focus on what feels most natural and where you can place that front leg to keep a flat foot. If it's too close, usually you'll be up on your toe and you'll notice that your heel's floating. And if it's too far and you can't keep your slightly forward leaning position with the torso, then you might want to bring it in a little bit. Now, once you've done that and you have an idea of where that's likely going to be, another tip that I would like to offer you is to stand against the wall with both feet and your back against the wall and then just step into your dominant leg and focus on keeping a slight forward momentum on that lead leg, and just note where that leg naturally goes. A lot of times we like to overcomplicate the walking lunge, but in reality, if we just put ourselves into scenarios where we have to rely on kind of our instinct to drive stability and movement patterns, that will be a really good bet. So a tip that I have for you is to start with your feet and back against the wall, and then just step and see what happens with your front leg. If you notice that you're not able to keep that front foot planted, go back to the first step, establish that again, and then go again and start realizing where your stepping pattern is likely going to be for performing traditional walking lunges. From there, if you want to get a bit more granular with the hips, your knees, and what your body is doing when it comes to positioning, split squats are another fantastic option. Obviously, there's a bit of a difference there because we are in a more static position, but I have filmed a split squat guide before, so check that out. I'm going to link it up there. But overall, those are the big things with the walking lunge that I would love for you to consider. Once you've got your positioning when it comes to what feels most natural with your walking lunge and lead leg position, do a lot of body weight reps. Focus on what you're doing with the head, rib cage, and pelvis, what you're doing with the legs and hips, and then once you've gained competency across the board, then you could start loading accordingly. I know you're gonna crush this, so good luck and nail the foundations because it's only gonna pay off bigger dividends in the long term. All right guys, that wraps up my guide on the walking lunge. The walking lunge is one of my favorite exercises from a lower body unilateral standpoint for driving hypertrophy and strength for the quads and glutes. Plus, you can perform a lot of high rep sets with no weight if you're ever traveling, etc. So it is just a great dynamic exercise across the board. If you have any questions on this movement or anything discussed in this video, hit me down below in the comments. And as always, guys, drop a like to the video, drop subscribe to the channel. I appreciate you so much for doing so. I'll see you guys in the next one.